Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining the Dubai Lynx Student Academy afternoon session. In this session, we're going to be talking about the question of what comes next after graduation. We're going to be talking about things like how do we get hired? What do I do after graduation? What are the next steps? And how can I best prepare for this extremely daunting prospect of life after university? Adult life can be extremely overwhelming, and I think a lot of us are still figuring it out. Without further ado, I want to hand over to Elena Agragimova, who's going to be hosting the panel on the next steps after graduation. Joining us on this panel is Margaret Flanagan, the co-founder of Tails and Heads, and Richard Smith, who's the regional director MENA at Salt Recruitment Agency. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. Thanks to Dubai Lynx for bringing us all together. My name is Elena Agragimova. I'm a co-founder of Bestern. We help people build essential skills, mindset for growth, and resilience to perform best at their work. I'm really excited to be your moderator today. I have two excellent speakers. And as the team mentioned, that we're going to be covering some of these questions that were just stated and much more. But we'll also invite you to ask questions. You have a nice, neat little chat box that you can use to communicate with us. So make sure you're throwing your questions to us whenever something comes up. We do have a few questions I'm going to be asking Margaret and Richard, but this is for you. So make sure you think of your questions and start plugging them in. So anyway, without further ado, let me just go ahead and pass it on to Margaret first to give us a quick intro. Margaret, tell us a little bit about where you come from, who you are, and kind of a little bit about background, and then we'll do the same with Richard.
Thanks so much, Elena. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's been a while since I was a graduate. I've been working in communications for longer than most people on this call have probably been alive. So for the last 20 years or more, first in the UK and then here in the Middle East. I'm currently in Dubai. I've been working with big agencies for most of my career, but took the opportunity during the pandemic to set up my own agency, moved into entrepreneurial field, and with a colleague called Lisa King, we set up Tails and Heads in March of this year. We've since grown to take on some amazing clients, including Euronews, NBC Universal, Dubai Tourism, and more. And we focus on two areas of communications, which is strategic consultancy and creative storytelling. So really looking at how we bring those two together to have creative campaigns that work across channels and really engage with audiences.
Thank you. Really excited to hear from you. And Richard?
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you, Dubai Lynx, for the opportunity. So I'm the regional director for a company called Salt. We are the largest digital recruitment, digital specialist recruitment business here in the Middle East, one of the largest globally as well. I've been in headhunting and recruitment for 16 years, and I've recruited in London, Nottingham, Amsterdam, and Dubai over those years. And this for me is a bit about our mission of creating futures within the digital economy. So helping to give back to that digital economy and hopefully help some of the next tranche of talent within the Middle East secure their first job.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and dive in. And Richard, I'll actually start with you because you come from that recruitment background. And one of the things that pops up in students' minds and one of the challenges that they experience is, okay, now I'm graduating. I don't necessarily have a lot of experience. So what is it that I can do from a recruitment perspective? For, what do recruiters look for in somebody who maybe have done one internship, maybe they don't have any experience, yet all the job applications is like, you need to have X number of experience. How can somebody go around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it is I call it the graduate conundrum, right? The first thing is, if you have got an internship, that is a very positive addition to your CV, generally. Even if it's an internship, I don't know, packing potatoes, it still shows a proactivity and a willingness to get stuff done. And it's that first experience within the workplace that does add a lot of value. In terms of how you make yourself stand out without experience, I think it's really critical to understand how you're marketing yourself. So you have to position yourself in such a way that you're still relevant for the job that you're going for. Okay, and if it is a job that needs 10 years experience, that's probably not going to be the right fit for this audience. However, if it's a job that requires 1 to maybe 3 years experience, there's often a level of flexibility within the employer's mindset around those roles. And what they'll be looking for in those roles is personality and ability to learn on the job if they give you a chance. Okay. So for example, you might want to argue that the skills that are taught in university today are much more relevant than the skills that were maybe taught 3 years ago. So you actually have a leg up as a fresh graduate coming into the workplace right now. Also, a lot of that best practice is still ingrained in your psyche from university, where someone with, say, 3, 4, 5 years experience may have picked up bad habits, and they're likely to be replicating what they did in their previous employers. So if you want true, fresh ideas, a graduate can be a really, really good hire for someone to make. And then, yeah, just make sure that you highlight the fact that, look, you know, you're looking for experience, you're not looking for compensation, in terms of you obviously want to get paid, but that's not your driver. Your driver is to learn and come in as an open book, willing to learn. And that, again, is quite refreshing for an employer to hear.
Thank you. And so to pick up on that, so what it sounds like is that even if you don't have experience, you sort of just have to have that story to tell when you do network with potential employers and recruiters. So Margaret, let me pass it on to you and ask you from an employer perspective, when students or recent graduates reaching out to you, maybe on LinkedIn, or maybe they're emailing you, what is the best way to capture an attention of an employer?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn is a great place to start in terms of networking. There are lots of places you can network, and it's a skill you should definitely be thinking about getting if you haven't got it already. When graduates reach out to me or anyone who's relatively new or at any level on LinkedIn, I'm always open to messages, always open to connecting with people. And I think what really gets to me is if they're talking about relevant issues, if they've done their homework, if they understand what we're saying as an agency, if they know which clients we're working for because they've been reading industry news, if they've been on the website or they've seen something in Campaign magazine about us, that there's a connection, that they've done their homework, that they're engaging with us because they want to know more about us and they already know a little bit. I think if you're trying to engage with someone and all you're thinking about is you don't connect. You need to treat it as a relationship, as you would, you know, on a date. You need to be interested in the person you're trying to approach. If you're not, and you're just talking about you, then it's not going to work, and you don't forge those emotional connections. And they're the bonds that you really need to stimulate if you're going to have any kind of relationship with an employer. But I would also say, you know, don't expect immediate response. We might not have the perfect job there. It might take 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 connections before we think, okay, we've got a role that's a good fit for that person. They can come in for an interview. Networking isn't an instant fix. It's something that takes time. You have to build on it and have patience when you're trying to connect with the industry.
That's great. Actually, a great point. Guys, definitely do your homework. And I've also interviewed students where they didn't know what Western was. And I was like, all right, well, that's not a great place to start. So definitely do your homework. And so another great point is that you said, okay, be patient. And I'm curious to hear from both of you. So starting with you, Margaret. So when we're talking about being patient, typically what I see is that students or graduates or job seekers, they'll reach out, and if they don't hear back right away, they typically don't follow up. And I think that there's this magic in following up, because as you said, people are busy, or sometimes we miss messages on LinkedIn. So what would you say, like an approach to follow up? How much is too much? How many times is too many times? You know, how do you follow up? Let's say if somebody doesn't respond to you, do you guys have any tips with that? Maybe starting with Margaret and then Richard.
Yeah, and Richard will probably know a lot better than me on this. I think, you know, you don't want to be too keen. You don't want to be bombarding people with messages, particularly if you're not getting a response. Again, is there something relevant that you're saying? Is there something, perhaps you're a student in Lebanon. I know there are students in Lebanon on this call, and you're coming into Dubai. you've connected with me previously and you say, listen, have you got time for a coffee or a quick chat? I'll be in Dubai next month. I'm doing some interviews. I'd love to talk to you. And if I have time, you know, and I'm sure many other people at many other levels in the industry, if we have time, an 8:30 meeting, half an hour, or a quick phone call, we're happy to do those kind of things. We want to support people in our industry. We know how tough it is at the moment. You know, we can't imagine how hard things are for graduates. You've got virtual environments. You've had difficulty connecting. You've come through an economic downturn. It's a really, really tough time. And you know, we're lucky we've had breaks that you don't necessarily have at the moment. And if we can help and we can have conversations, we will have them. We just might not have a position at the time, but we can suggest, you know, other agencies that may have positions. I typically will know who's hiring in the industry, who's just won a big new account, and I can maybe share some pointers. And again, anyone at my level in the industry would have that same sort of information. And most of us are quite helpful. We're not the scary things you think we are.
Great. Richard, what about you? What are some tips?
I totally agree with Margaret. I think the key point that I would make on follow-up specifically is go back with new information. If you come back with, have you read my email? Is there anything for me? Over and over again, that's just going to be frustrating for the reader. If you go back and say, hello, Mr. Employer, it's been 3 months since I last contacted you. Did you know I've just completed an internship, or I've just completed a project or a course that might be relevant for you, thus I am a different prospect. Would you then engage with me for some sort of coffee or meeting or something? Doing something new is going to be more important. Alternatively, you haven't got any new information, ask a new question, right? So it could be, you know, I know you haven't got any hires at the moment, Margaret, but I also know that you used to work at XYZ agency, Ogilvy, or whoever it may be. Would you know anyone at Ogilvy that might be worth me reaching out to? Right, it's a different question from, have you got any jobs for me right now? And then the third thing on follow-up would be, if you have any way, as Margaret was alluding to earlier, of actually serving the client or serving the prospective employer, not in a major way, but it could be, I saw this article and I thought of you. Right, that is a standout email for a graduate to send to an employer, and will put you front of mind when those opportunities come up.
Great. So do your homework, guys. Be prepared to have a conversation. Think, you know, approach it mindfully. Don't repeat the information that you might have already stated. So to pick up on that, Richard, so let's say the person's done their homework. They have, you know, prepared, they got their foot in the door, and now they have an interview with you. What is a recruiter typically look for? Generally speaking, of course, there's specific skill sets you look for based on positions, but beyond the actual know-how of the job, what is it that, how can a recent graduate impress a recruiter?
Yeah, I think key as a graduate is how you come across personally, right? And that, from that, I mean your personality, your confidence, your charisma. Even introverted people can be extremely enthusiastic about a topic if they know a lot about that topic and they're passionate about it, right? What we struggle with graduates is generally things like weak handshakes, poor posture, lack of eye contact, not prepared in terms of questions and asking questions at the end of an interview, and a lack, you know, even if they're really interested in the job, if they're not showing that in the way they hold themselves, that can really be a detriment, right? You know, you're not going to hire someone that does not seem enthusiastic about the role that you're working on. But to balance that, you also don't want to be bouncing off the walls like a crazy person, you know, saying this is the greatest thing since sliced bread and so excited about this job, right? There's a way of, you know, for example, varying your tone, taking your time about answering questions to show that you care about the question being answered, and you know, having that enthusiasm, that inner thoughts that, you know, I really want to help you, Mr. Employer, succeed in your mission.
So it sounds like just having that balance between being excited, but also kind of being ready to have the conversation accordingly. Thanks for that, Richard. So Margaret, something we talked about before a little bit is that also when students graduate, there's this transition period from being a student into becoming an employee, and there's almost this kind of behavior change that happens. So Margaret, I'll pass it on to you, and then Richard, I'd love to hear from you as well if there's something you want to add there. But talk to us a little bit about that.
Sure, and I think, yeah, I think when you're in college, you're in an environment where you're with peers, everyone's learning the same things at the same time. You're in an environment where someone is helping you and supporting you at every step of the way. When you enter the workplace, that all changes. You know, people are at very different levels. You're not all learning the same thing at the same time. You're suddenly thrown into an environment where you're the one with the least information. You may have been top of your class in university, and that can be a real hit to your confidence. Some people can thrive on that. They can think, you know, I really want to learn more and do more, but it's a very different environment, and you need to be far more proactive in how you approach projects, because you don't have that tutor there handing you stuff to do. You're in an environment where everyone's very busy. They've all got their own roles to do. You need to be trying to keep one step ahead of what's being asked of you. You need to be trying to think, okay, I get a task to do. How can I not just do that task at hand, but add something that really helps me stand out? How can I do a bit more? How can I do some extra research? How can I go back with an extra suggestion as to how this might be enhanced? We don't expect you to know everything. We're not expecting graduates to come into the workplace able to develop strategies or to provide client counsel. So don't pretend that you can do all of that. Ask questions, make sure you're still in that learning environment. You've been a student, carry on that learning when you're in the workplace, and don't be scared of not knowing things, because you're not expected to know things. The brightest people will be the ones who are asking the most questions, even if it's about the smallest things.
Yes, and often what I also hear is that a lot of employers simply really look for potential. So that's what that proactivity, that it's not necessarily about, you know, knowing everything or pretending to, because nobody does, right? But it's about how can you be proactive? How can you show that you're willing to learn? It's that having that growth mindset, continuous curiosity. Richard, is there anything you wanted to add from your perspective here?
Yeah, just very shortly, I'd say, you know, it's the mindset goes from taking your education to giving service to a company. You know, you're going from that taker to a giver. You've got to be, as you say, proactive in how you offer to help the company. And the more you know the company's mission, the more excited you are about the company's mission, the more likely you are to want to give freely of your extra efforts and all the rest of it. And yeah, when you don't know what you don't, you know, a lot of the time graduates don't know what they don't know. They're very early in that learning curve. So better to ask questions, and ask too many questions once and pick up the answer and action it, than sit there and try and figure it out, which is what most people have had to do through university.
I love the part about also knowing what is it about that specific company that interests you, and I think that is missed quite a bit. So we also typically as fresh graduate also see students go for these big names, big companies, but that's not necessarily the right approach, right? So and I think for those that are listening, guys, just think about, you know, what type of typical work environment you're looking for, right? Is it a big company? Do you want to be part of a larger team? Do you want to be a part of a smaller team? Do you want to be an individual contributor, or are you looking to kind of grow into more senior roles in the future? And I think understanding the company culture is spot on, Richard. And I think that also makes it a selling point in interviews, because if an interview is able to show me why they're interested in the mission and the vision of the company, that kind of scales you up above other candidates. But also on the flip side, not everybody's looking to go into corporations, so or any company, right? So some people want to go into that entrepreneurship journey. So Margaret, can you talk to us a little bit about what is that journey like for those that on this call looking to start their own thing?
I mean, there's no one route to entrepreneurship. It's everyone has their own path, and I've gone into it relatively late in my career, but I've also worked in the UK for entrepreneurs in particular. I was with 4 Communications when that was a startup back in 2001. I worked in the London office there, and I learned a lot from being part of a very small team led by industry leaders who'd set up their own business. I understood how to run a company from them, and I stayed with them for 7 years, and then I've stayed another 10, 11 years in another big agency since then. So I've seen both sides of the coin. I've worked for big agencies. For me, I needed to have the security of understanding how a big company works, how to run a big account, how to lead teams, the processes and functions, whereas some other people who are perhaps more natural entrepreneurs might want to go into it really early and learn on the job. And it's entirely a matter of what works for you. But I would say, you know, you need the financial security. It's not easy to be an entrepreneur. There are startup costs involved. It can be a slow journey. What's benefited me as an entrepreneur is having 20 odd years of clients and relationships within the industry, which has allowed me to grow quickly. But if you're starting from scratch and you have to do all of that from scratch, again, it's back to being patient. It's a lot of hard work, a lot of determination, but if there are so many benefits to being your own boss that I can't even begin to say, and so I absolutely recommend it, but do it in a way that works for you, which might mean, you know, doing it now, or it might mean doing it in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
Yeah, and I have to second that. It's definitely an exciting journey, and what I would recommend is to see if you can volunteer or somehow participate in an existing startup, for example, join somebody who's already doing something that you might be interested in, just to get that experience and that exposure into that world of entrepreneurship. I have a few more questions, but I'm also wanting to give the audience a chance to ask their questions. So I'm going to ask one more question, and in the meanwhile, I invite our audience to go ahead and start dropping your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. So this is your turn. Whatever hasn't been answered, feel free to start asking. And while you guys are dropping your questions, let me ask a question that is, you know, that is something that we can definitely find online, yet we still make the same mistakes as applicants, which is CVs. So how do you actually go about a strong CV? What does a strong CV look like? What about the grammar, the way we say things in the CV? What are some things that candidates need to consider? Maybe Margaret, you can just give us a few pointers, and then we'll pass it on to Richard from his perspective as well.
Absolutely. I'm sure Richard's seen a lot more CVs than I have. Keep it short. You don't need more than 2 pages, especially not as a entry level. Be honest, don't overclaim. Make sure it's spelt correctly. If you're doing design work, social work, make sure you include links to your portfolio so we can see examples of your design skills or other skills. Share your social channels if you're comfortable sharing those, if you've got great content on them and you're looking to work in social media. And also make sure that the language is compelling. Think about reading this, think about summarizing things. How do you capture someone's attention in that first paragraph or 2 without the overclaim, without referring to superlatives? Just be honest about yourself, but be the very best version of yourself and highlight the things that you know are really good skills and stand out and are possibly differentiators from the other people in your workplace or in your college.
Definitely. I'd add a couple of things to that. I think Margaret's pretty much spot on. I'd say exactly the same in terms of length. Keep it nice and short, keep it direct, keep all your typos out. However, you also want to think about how a recruiter is searching and what is the job that I'm applying for. So often we might get let's say a great English graduate come out of university. If they're applying for a copywriting role in an ad agency, it's very different from applying for a copywriting role in a PR agency, and even more different if you're trying to do social media content, right? So you need to make sure you understand the audience and what they're going to be looking for, and understand what buzzwords, especially if you're applying to adverts online. Typically an ad will have over 1,000 applicants, and people will definitely be using the filter to get rid of a lot of the bump when they're looking through those ad responses. If you haven't got the right buzzwords in there, so if it's a social media job, if you haven't mentioned the word social media on your CV, you might not come up, right? If it's a graphic designer job, you want to mention the words graphic designer somewhere on your CV to make sure that you are going to be coming up at the top there. And then a couple of things I have seen, a couple of the don'ts in terms of CVs and portfolios. Whatever you do, don't take credit for other people's work, especially in the creative industry. I've seen that quite a bit where people say, I created X concept. Well, it generally isn't any one individual. It's normally a team of people that will have created a concept or a portfolio or a campaign. So, it's always good to say what your role was in that team, what your contribution was and what your achievement was and what the result of that team effort was. Generally, employers are not hiring individual superstars. They want team-based superstars, right? Someone that can get along cohesively, because no one can do it all themselves. So in your portfolio, in your CV, it's really important that you have actual achievements that you can back up, that you can talk about in depth, and that you really genuinely contribute to. If you can get all of that into 2 pages, then you're in a good spot.
Excellent. And we have a few questions coming in, so I'm just going to go ahead and shoot those out, and you guys can both answer if you wish. So what kind of questions should we ask at an end of an interview, especially if we don't really have any and everything is understood? It's a great question. What do you do? What do you ask?
I'll give you my opinion. I think you should ask about the interviewer. There's no way that anyone would have briefed you in depth about the interviewer. And I think it's a very compelling question to ask them. So why is it that you decided to join this company? How has your journey been? And where do you see yourself in the next few years? To your interview, I think that's a really strong question to ask at the end of an interview, regardless of what has been covered, unless the person has already gone into a lot of depth about their personal background. I'd also ask questions around the mission and the vision of the business, and maybe if that has been covered at a surface level, ask them about values, or ask them about how that mission is seen in reality. So ask a question around the original question, if that makes sense. The other key thing on questions is have at least minimum 10 prepared and written out in advance of the interview, and bring them with you written down. The chances of them covering all 10 in a 30 to 60-minute interview is very low, right? So you've automatically got some good questions there that you can ask. And it also, from an interviewer's point of view, is much more impressive in terms of the amount of homework. If you've gone and prepared 10, 15 really relevant questions about that industry, about that company, about the leadership, about the mission, the vision, whatever it might be, whatever interests you, and you've got them written out, it just shows that you're a credible candidate as well.
Margaret, anything you want to add?
Yeah, I really like the mention of asking about the interviewer. Because that will also help forge an emotional connection with that person, and we hire based on attitude and how we feel about a person as much as we hire on skills. I know it's a cliche, but attitude does trump aptitude in a lot of cases. I would also say, ask about something about the industry. For example, if you've read something in Campaign magazine, or seen a Dubai Lynx campaign or a Cannes Lion campaign, ask a question about, I've seen this trend in the industry. Is that something you're noticing? Or is it a global trend? Is it regional? That to me shows that you're interested in the industry. You're interested in finding out what's at the cutting edge. You understand which of the industry media writing about this. You are looking globally to see what's the best in the world in terms of creativity, and you're thinking about it and processing it. And if you're then asking those level of questions, you're showing the interviewer that you really care about this business, what's happening, and its future.
Great, thank you for that. So another question, so I have quite a few here. So how do we effectively use our unemployment? And do we need years of experience in order to get a job? We kind of touched base on it earlier, but if let's just I guess, if somebody is not, I guess what they're asking is if somebody's not able to have that work experience, you know, I know Richard pointed to, you know, kind of having any kind of experience, even if you're making sandwiches, right? It's just about having that work experience. But let's say they haven't had that. What else can students do, can graduates do to, you know, improve their profile, if there's anything here?
First thing I'd highlight is getting a job is a job, right? The amount of hours taken to get a job, people really underestimate that. The amount of time it takes to make an effective application, in some cases can be an hour or two because of the amount of detail, the tailoring that you want to put into your application. So it's very, very possible you could spend 40 or 50 hours, a whole week of time, just applying and trying to find that right job for you. Okay, so you definitely want to make sure that you're in a situation where if you are searching, you can put in that time, or you're willing to put in that effort to get the opportunities. And it is frustrating how long it takes, but that is the honest truth, that it is almost like a full-time job, getting a job. The other thing you can do if you're unemployed, well, there's a lot of obvious ones, which would be doing projects, there's a comment there about self-learning. There's no reason as a graphic designer or copywriter you can't go and create something to add to your portfolio, a new angle. You know, look at a campaign that has recently come out and say, okay, how would I do that? Right? How would I take that brief and interpret that and craft around that? You know, that is not going to be a waste of time. And then you could even go to that company that created that campaign and say, this is how I would have interpreted it. I would love to have a coffee to talk about how you guys came up with your idea, you know, what that client's like to work with, etc. You know, ideas like that, slightly more out of the box, is probably what's going to work, you know, when you're unemployed. But don't underestimate the amount of time it does take to get a job. It is a pain, but it is the reality as well.
Margaret, maybe this one is for you. So what advice do you have for people who are looking to raise their personal profiles?
It's a tough one. I mean, creating standout is really hard, particularly when you're all coming out with the same degree. There's a lot of noise in the market. There aren't that many jobs. I would say the good thing is everyone is hiring again in comms at the moment. There are lots and lots of roles. People are busy. It's a growth market. It's a good time to be coming into the industry. To make yourself stand out, I would say do the networking. Make sure you have those connections. You know who people are. If you're an introvert, that's fine as well. Do the social connections, do the LinkedIn connections. It doesn't have to be face-to-face. But I would also say, understand yourself. Be the best version of you. Don't try and be someone else. Don't try and be someone you're not. Don't try and pretend to have skills that you don't have. Try and make sure you understand who you are and what you have to offer. Value yourself. Appreciate yourself, know what your skills are, know what your weaknesses are, work on your weaknesses, but be honest about them as well. I think, you know, we're finding more and more that it's an authenticity that people are hiring for. We don't want perfect people. None of us are perfect people. It's about, what do you have to offer that no one else has? Maybe you have a better sense of humor. Maybe you have, you know, the best PowerPoint skills in the business. Maybe you are the best presenter, but try and find out what it is that really makes you shine, and practice all of that stuff. You know, you can do virtual interviews with your friends. Most of the first interactions will be virtual meetings, so rehearse them, get some honest feedback from your friends, from your family. Try things out. You know, you can try things on and see if they fit. If they don't, then don't wear them again. But try and learn about yourself and what makes you happy. And not every job is going to be the right fit for you either. You know, you don't have to change yourself to fit a job. The right job will appreciate you for being you. And I think, you know, if we try and change ourselves to fit in the role, we're going to be unhappy. So try and make sure that you're not, yes, take every opportunity and learn from it, but don't think you have to stick with it if it's not the right one for you.
Thank you for that. And we have time for just one more question. And Chris, I think, oh, sorry, Richard, I don't know why I called you Chris. I'm looking at the names here. Richard, I think this one might be interesting for you to answer. So somebody asked, do you think it's time to start recruiting people based on training or series of tasks given to the candidate in order to truly see their potential instead of using the traditional approach of Q&A interviews?
I would completely agree with that, and it's a trend that we're seeing across the market. I'll give an example. A large airline, shall we say, previously were interviewing based on CVs and then hiring off the back of that. We had a portfolio of 20 candidates rejected based on CVs. 6 months later, they implemented a practical test to test these. It was actually programmers, to test these programmers and see whether they had the skills. And 75% of them passed. And of those, 10 of those 15 that passed have now been hired by the airline. So I think people are not trained at university how to write an amazing CV. They're trained how to do their craft and give them an opportunity to show their craft. Design has always been good with this because people look for a portfolio. They look for a portfolio before they look for the CV generally. But in things like copy, for example, I think we could do a lot better at setting people writing assignments. It's 100% the way. And then it also, from an interviewee point of view, gives you a chance to get some feedback, gives you a chance to understand where your weak points might be. So I'm all for it from a recruiter point of view, and I hope more of the industry takes it up.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for, but I encourage the attendees to connect with our speakers on LinkedIn. I know there's a few more questions, but I think just if I can summarize the session in that there's really no magic formula, there's no magic stick that's going to kind of get you that job. But if there was one, it would be preparation, knowing what you want, doing your homework, understanding what skills you have to offer, looking beyond what you can offer in experience, as many students don't have experience when they graduate. So how can you find ways to supplement that? How can you find ways to work on your soft skills or human skills that you're able to show that passion and proactivity and potential to an employer? So I know there's a few more questions. So again, we weren't able to get to all of them. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. I'm sure we'll be happy to continue the conversation. To the speakers, thank you for excellent contributions, and to Dubai Lynx again for bringing us all together. Back to you, Dubai Lynx.
Thank you so much to Elena and Richard and Margaret. Thank you so much for an insightful session. I've learned a lot from this session. This takes us to the end of the day one of the Student Academy. Today in this session, we've talked about areas like how to get your foot into the door, how to brave adult life, and how to enhance your employability. And it's been extremely valuable even for me. We understand that some of you have joined from separate devices and others are joining as part of a big classroom and are watching us on the big screen. So a big shout out to all the universities and to all the professors and the students who are joining us today. Thank you so much for being a part of this brilliant initiative, and we hope it was as helpful for you as it was for us. This marks the end of the day of day one, but we will have a student competition live briefing tomorrow at 10 a.m. We will be talking with Austin Allison, who is the jury president from Campaign Middle East, and he will be sharing the live briefing of the Student Cover Competition 2022, and you'll also have the answer to ask any questions in order to win this Dubai Lynx student competitions as well. The link for the tomorrow session is going to be sent in the chat box now, so we hope to see you there. Thank you so much, everyone, and have a lovely day.